morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Solamo, and welcome to this video lesson.
Today's lesson is Chapter 7, Unit 1, The Extension of Australian Colonial Settlements.
For your reference, you can check it on your book on pages 274 to 278. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to identify the factors which led to the decision to colonize the eastern side of Australia, assess the developments in each British colony, evaluate the life of convicts in secondary settlements, list the events that began the gold rush in New South Wales and Victoria, and lastly, explain the reasons for the rapid population growth in Western Australia from 1981 to 1901. Before we proceed to our main lesson, we will have some background information about Australia. So let's watch this video clip. So, that's how the name Australia came to be. Who were the first people to settle or discover or occupy the land in Australia? The Dutch, British, Portuguese? No, the Aboriginals. They're the first people in Australia who arrived 50,000 years ago. Next, we have Indonesians. They're the first non-native people to visit Australia, followed by Portuguese. They're the first Europeans to see Australia, but they had no idea it was Australia that they were looking at. They just saw seemingly barren coastline of northwestern Australia as they sailed past. And next, we have the Dutch. They're the first Europeans to land on Australia. But still, they didn't even know it. Other Dutch sailors landed in Australia, but they seemed not interested in occupying the land because they saw the land as empty and with no commercial benefit. And now we have the British. They're the first people to establish that Australia was an island continent. And also, they're the first people to colonize Australia. So, how did it happen? Captain James Cook had secret orders from the British commander of naval force to find the southern continent. His expedition landed on the east coast of Australia on the 29th of April 1770. Then he returned to London with accounts favoring colonization at Botany Bay, which is now in Sydney, New South Wales. Then the British returned in 1778 to colonize this new land they claimed they had discovered. So New South Wales then became the first British colony in Australia. So, British colonies started in New South Wales and later on extended or expanded to other parts of Australia. And that is our lesson today. Unit 1, the extension of Australian colonial settlements, or in other words, the expansion of British colony in Australia. As you can see on the picture, British colony started in New South Wales in 1788, that's in Sydney, and then in Tasmania in 1800s, and later on, the British had colonized the whole continent of Australia. So now, this is Australian flag. It contains flag of United Kingdom because it was once a British colony. The seven-pointed star of Federation here, it represents each of Australia's 6 states. So those states are New South Wales, Tasmania, Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, and Queensland. And one additional point represents Australia's territory. So this is what we call Northern Territory. So these 6 states were used to be separate, okay, not united, separate British colonies. Now, I want you to pause this video for a while and try to remember or memorize the 6 states and its capital city in 2 minutes. That's a challenge. But if you think it's not enough, then take your time. Now, if you're ready, click play again and let's see. Okay, now let's check if you have memorized it. Number 1. What is number 1? What state is that? Okay, that is New South Wales. That's correct. And the capital city is Sydney. Number 2. Number 2 is Tasmania. And the capital city is Hobart. Good. Number 3. It's Victoria. And the capital city is Melbourne. Let's have number 4. Number 4 is Western Australia. And the capital city is Perth. Good job. And for number 5, that is South Australia, and the capital city is Adelaide. Okay, and the next one is Queensland, with the capital city of Brisbane. And now, how about the capital city of Australia? Do you know the capital city of Australia? That's Canberra. So now, why did Britain expand their empire, as you can see here? Okay? If you can still remember your previous lesson, you know that colonies are very important during that time because colonies provided reliable supply of resources or raw materials such as tobacco, cotton, wool, and others. Cheap labor, markets for their goods, and ports for merchant and naval vessels. How about Australia, specifically the eastern side of Australia, which was discovered by James Cook? What were the factors that led to the colonization of eastern side of Australia, which was known as Terra Australis at that time? Let's take a look at these pictures. As you can see here, these are the raw materials: wool, cotton, tobacco, and also sugar. These were some of the raw materials needed in British factories to manufacture goods. Next, there was a high crime rate in Britain. Jails were full, and they didn't know where to put all the convicts or people who had been sent to jail for theft or other crimes. So British transported them to America. But unfortunately, the British lost in the American War of Independence. America gained independence, and from then on, they refused to accept convicts. French exploration and interest in the Pacific. French were also interested in expanding their empire in Asia Pacific, and British considered them as rival. So, they have to set up their control in this region. And aside from that, there was also profitable trade in the Asia Pacific region. So that means money. Profitable means a lot of money. Okay? Especially in China and India. So that means they have to set up ports and naval bases in the Pacific region. So, those are the 4 factors or some factors that influenced the colonization of eastern side of Australia. And according to James Cook, local indigenous people were not a problem. They were only few in number and confined to coastal areas. And Britain declared the new colony Terra Nullius or land belonging to no one and took the land in the name of the British Crown. So again, that's the start of colonization of Eastern Australia. Now let's have this picture. Can you still remember the first British colony? That's New South Wales. Can you see the Opera House? So now again, let's have New South Wales. It was initially a penal or prison colony. That means it is a settlement used to hold prisoners and use them for working in part of the colonial territories. Remember, the penal colony was used to be their colonies in America, but these colonies won their independence and refused or they no longer accept convicts. Therefore, New South Wales turned to be a penal colony. But later on, New South Wales became source of valuable products, especially wool, for the booming factories in Great Britain. And land was granted to ex-convicts, soldiers, and free settlers in New South Wales during 1790s. Now, the demand for farming land prompted the governor to open land in Parramatta in 1972, in Hawkesbury River area in 1794, and also in west of the Great Dividing Range during 1820s and 1830s. And how did these farms thrive? It's because of the use of cheap labor provided by assigned convicts. So, that's how colonization in New South Wales turned out to be. Now, let's move on to the next one. But before that, let's have a picture game. Can you guess the name of the state being shown here? Look at the pictures carefully. And the answer is Van Diemen's Land. But now we call it Tasmania. Dutch explorer named Abel Tasman saw this island and called it Van Diemen's Land. He did not realize that this island was part of Australia, and this island was later renamed Tasmania in honor of him. And a while ago, I asked you to memorize the states and the capital city. So what's the capital city of Tasmania? In 1803, George Bell and Matthew Flinders sailed south to Tasmania, as you can see here. On that year, David Collins led an expedition to establish a penal colony on Derwent River. So there's Derwent River there, around that area. And Hobart Town was surveyed as the capital city of the new settlement. So that is the capital city of Tasmania. Now let's have the secondary settlements. When we say secondary settlements, those are settlements for more dangerous or difficult convicts and those who reoffended in Australia. Now, what are examples of dangerous or difficult convicts? Can you name some? Maybe you can think of serial killer, psychopath, kidnappers, murderers, and others. Now Port Arthur, Moreton Bay in Queensland, and Norfolk Island were chosen as secondary settlements. Why is that? Because these settlements or these areas were distant or far from farmlands owned by free settlers, and also they are isolated from trading ships. And what was life of the convicts like in these secondary settlements? It was really harsh and punishments were brutal. The common punishments were flogging from about 25 to 500 lashes. Imagine 500 lashes. Can you bear that? The next one. Do you know what that one is? That's leg irons. And how heavy that was. Imagine it's more than 10 kilograms. It's so heavy. And the next one, it's a thread mill. Nowadays, we use thread mill in doing exercises. But before, it was used as punishment for the convicts. And convicts were naked from the waist up. Can you imagine that? Next, the Port Arthur Penal Colony was the scene of some of the worst physical and psychological punishments that the world has ever seen. Now let's have next colony. Can you guess it using the picture clues? Look at the pictures again carefully. And the answer is Victoria or Victoria. But then before, it was called Port Phillip District. In 1835, Hamilton Hume and William Howell went south from Sydney by land. They found the Murray River and the good land in Victoria. And what led to the establishment of a settlement in Port Phillip District or Victoria by John Batman in 1835? The answer is it's because of the demand for fertile land to graze sheep. Remember wool? It comes from the sheep's fleece, and wool was an important raw material in factories during that time. Now, there are two significant features of this new region. First, the land was purchased from indigenous people. So, John Batman bought the land from indigenous people instead of using violence. And that was good. And secondly, it was a free settlement. So that means no convicts were transported directly to this region. And funny thing about John Batman, so he's not a superhero, but for me, he's like a hero because instead of using violence, he just purchased the land from indigenous people. And another thing, if John Batman had his way, the capital city of Victoria would have been Batmania. Now, speaking of the capital city, this is the image of Elizabeth Street in Melbourne. This shows the progress of the town in just over a decade. It grew rapidly as a service center and the capital city of the region. The region, known as Victoria, became independent of New South Wales in 1851. Okay, now let's have the next one. What state is this? Can you guess it? Okay, it's South Australia. South Australia. Next slide. In 1836, a free settler colony started in South Australia where no convicts were ever sent. This colony emphasized the importance of religious freedom and progressive ideas. It was privately funded and carefully planned on the ideas of Edward Gibbon Wakefield. What became the capital city of South Australia? It's Adelaide. In 1836 to 37, Colonel William Light, the first Surveyor General of South Australia, surveyed the land on the banks of the Torrens River that was to become the capital city. How was this colony beneficial to Britain? The pastoral industry expanded rapidly in the colony to supply resources to Britain. The pastoral industry or pastoral farming was aimed at producing livestock rather than growing crops. So livestock includes sheep, cows, horse, and others. Now, look at the pictures. Which one is farming land and which one is pastoral land? So, this one, this is a farmland, and this is pastoral land, and also this one. Now, let's move on. This is the easiest. What state is this? This is Queensland. Okay, now John Oxley, the Surveyor General of New South Wales, was sent north of Sydney to find suitable areas for the settlement of reoffending convicts. When we say reoffending convicts, they are the people who are already convicted but go on to commit another crime within a set time period. And the Moreton Bay area was chosen as a secondary settlement. Convicts there were used to clear forests and grow corn. Timber from the area along the Brisbane River was used to build the small town of Eden Glassy, which was later called Brisbane and became the capital city of Queensland. Moreton Bay was open to free settlers during the 1840s. Now, Queensland was used to be part of New South Wales, but following pressures from its citizens, Queensland became a separate colony in December 1859. How did the population increase and settlement expand in this new colony during the 1860s? It's because of the promotional campaigns for British and German migrants and the sale of cheap land to them. Now let's move on to the last one, the colonization of Western Australia. This western third of the continent, which the Dutch called New Holland, was claimed by Britain when the French seemed interested in colonizing the region. In December 1826, the first British military outpost was set up at King George Sound, here. So this is King George Sound. The Swan River Colony started in 1829 with town sites at Fremantle and Perth. James Stirling and Charles Fraser surveyed the Swan River. James Stirling wrote a bias report exaggerating the fertility of the soil and usefulness of the Swan River, and because of this, Stirling was appointed as the Lieutenant Governor of the Swan River Colony and proclaimed the colony in June 29. It's supposedly an agricultural settlement to supply resources to Britain, but poor planning and infertile soil caused progress to be slow during the first 20 years of the colony. In the late 1840s, convicts were sent into the colonies to provide cheap labor. They were used to construct roads, bridges, and public buildings and to clear land. Did this development make more people migrate in this colony? Yes. However, it was gold, not convicts, that transformed both eastern and western regions of Australia. Now, let's imagine your sister or brother is telling you at this moment that there's a room in your house filled with gold. What are you going to do? Surely, you're going to stop watching this video and run to that room and take those golds. Am I right? It's the same thing when people around the world found out or discovered payable golds in Australia. We call this gold rush. The gold boom in New South Wales and Victoria. In February 1851, payable gold was discovered at Ophir. This started a gold rush in New South Wales. And later, in 1851, the rush expanded to the newly created colony of Victoria, particularly in Bendigo and Ballarat. Now, during 1852, 370 miners flooded into Australia from all over the world. New South Wales and Victoria were changed forever. Mining towns were opened, population swelled, and land was occupied for farming. The gold boom in Western Australia. In September 1892, enormous gold finds were made at Coolgardie, and in Calgary 9 months later in June 1893. This began a gold rush in Western Australia that boosted the wealth of the isolated colony. But what was the reason for the rapid population growth in Western Australia? It was the economic downturn in Victoria that led to the migration of thousands of the Ottersiders to the west. The Ottersiders was the name given by the Western Australians to people from the eastern colonies. And aside from the Ottersiders, thousands of Americans, Europeans, and Chinese also tried their luck on the gold fields around Calgary. So as you can see on this table, look at Western Australia. The population increased from 7,186 to 53,177 in 1891. Not only in Western Australia, but also in the eastern parts. Okay, now let's move on to our first activity. I want you to match the name of the British colony to the significant person who led its establishment. The first one is done for you. Now, you have 1 minute to finish this activity. And your time starts now. Now, let's check your answers. For number 1, it's already given. It's James Cook. So now let's move on to number 2. It's letter E. Okay. For number 3, Western Australia, that's letter B. And for number 4, that's letter C. And for number 5, Victoria. And don't forget, Victoria, the old name of Victoria was Port Phillip District. For number 5, the answer is letter F. And lastly, Queensland, letter A. Great job! Now let's have our second activity. For this activity, you have to answer the following questions. And I'll give you 2 minutes to finish this. But if you need more time, you can pause the video for a while, then continue when you are already ready. Now let's check your answers. Okay, for number 1. What do you mean by these Latin words? Terra Australis. It's a Latin term for the land of the south. How about Terra Nullius? It's a Latin term meaning land belonging to no one. Number 2. Which states were used to be penal colonies? The answers were New South Wales, Queensland, and Tasmania, and also Western Australia. But Western Australia was supposed to be for agricultural settlement. But because of slow progress, convicts were sent to construct roads and clear lands. Number 3. Which colonies were established for free settlers? The answers were Victoria and South Australia. There were only 2 colonies for free settlers. Next, number 4. What were the secondary settlements for more dangerous or difficult convicts? And what was life of convicts like in those settlements? So, the secondary settlements were Port Arthur, Moreton Bay, and Norfolk Island. And life of the convicts there was so harsh and punishments were brutal. Number 5. Why was progress in Swan River Colony slow? It's because of poor planning and infertile soil. Number 6. Which state became a separate colony in December 1859? It's Queensland. And lastly, what event led to the increase in population and economy to thrive in all of the colonies? The answer is Gold Rush. Now, this is our last activity and also the summary of our lesson. And we're going to do this all together. Okay, let's start. Let's start with the 4 factors which led to colonization of Australia. So, number 1, America's refusal to accept convicts. Good job. Number 2, search for blank to meet the demand from the British industry. The answer is resources. Number 3, French blank and interest in the Pacific. Correct answer is exploration. Okay. Number 4, profitable blank in the Asia Pacific region, which necessitated the establishment of and naval bases in the Pacific region. So let's have the first one. It's profitable trade. And the second one of establishment of ports. Okay, good job. Now let's move on to colonization of Eastern Australia. Let's start with New South Wales. It was initially a blank colony. What's the answer? A penal colony. Great. Next, later, it became source of valuable products, especially wool. Good. For the booming factories in Great Britain. Blank was granted to ex-convicts, soldiers, and free settlers in New South Wales during the 1790s. So what was granted to them? Land. Great. And farms thrived because of the use of provided by assigned convicts. Cheap labor. Great. Next, let's move on to Tasmania. And what was the old name of Tasmania? That's Van Diemen's Land. Great. Let's move on. Then George Bass and Matthew Finder sailed south to Tasmania. Who led an expedition to establish a penal colony on the Derwent River? That was David Collins. Great job. And Blanktown was surveyed as the capital of this new settlement. The answer is Hobart Town. Okay, now let's move on. Queensland. Who's the Surveyor General of New South Wales who was sent north of Sydney to find suitable areas for the settlement of reoffending convicts? That's John Oxley. Okay? And small town of Eden Glassy was built, which was later called Brisbane. Great. And due to pressure from its citizens, a blank colony of Queensland was created in December 1859. What's the answer? That's separate colony of Queensland. And lastly, we have Victoria, or what we call Port Phillip District. So Hamilton Hume and William Hovell went south from Sydney by land. They found the Murray River and could land in Victoria. Now, the demand for blank to graze sheep led to the establishment of settlement in Victoria in 1835. So, there are 3 questions there. So, the first one, the demand for fertile land. Great. To graze sheep led to the establishment of a settlement in Victoria by John Batman. Good job! And 2 important features of this new colony. This land was purchased from indigenous people, and it was a free settlement. Great job! Now let's move on in South Australia. In 1836, a blank settler colony started in South Australia. A free settler. Great. Where blank convicts were ever sent. No convicts. Okay? No convicts were ever sent there. This colony emphasized the importance of religious freedom and progressive ideas. It was privately funded and carefully planned on the ideas of Edward Gibbon Wakefield. Next, Western Australia. The colonization of Western Australia. In December 1826, the first British military outpost was set up at King George Sound in Western Australia. The blank colony started in 1829. The Swan River Colony. Good job. James Stirling was the blank governor of the Swan River Colony. Was the first governor. Okay. Then, blank planning and blank soil caused progress to be very slow during the first 20 years of the colony. What's the answer? What kind of planning and soil? Okay, poor planning and infertile soil. Now, in the late 1840s, convicts were sent into the colonies to provide cheap labor. Next, gold rush in New South Wales and Victoria. It started in 1850s when payable blank was discovered in Ophir Cay. The sky payable gold, which started a blank rush in gold rush in where? New South Wales. And the rush expanded to the newly created colony of Victoria. Now, how about gold rush in Western Australia? It started in September 1892 when an enormous gold finds were made at Coolgardie and in June 1893 in Kalgoorlie. Thousands of blank Americans, Europeans, and Chinese also tried their luck in gold mining. Thousands of the other sides or people from eastern colonies. Great job, everybody! Well then, everybody, now to end this lesson, I will leave you a question to think or ponder. And here's the question. Why were the interests of the Aboriginal people not considered when the British colonists cultivated land in Australia? And what do you think was the outcome of the contact between the British colonists and the Aboriginal people?
Thank you for watching. I hope everyone is safe at home. See you soon!